So hello everyone. As I just mentioned, I'll be talking about architecting Android applications effectively. I'll be sharing the journey so far since last year when our entire team decided on the architecture that we wanted to proceed with. What are the things that we have done to evolve this architecture and how this architecture has helped us in addressing some of the challenges that the product overall faces in the company. So with that, first I would like to introduce myself. My name is Richa, and I work as a software engineer at Coursera. A question for everyone. Anyone knows what this is? Paris, yes. So why am I showing a picture of Paris? Paris, the city of Paris is arranged as 20 arrondissements, and it spirals out. This is not the center, but the center is around Louvre, and it spirals out into numbered arrondissements. And as a tourist, you can just look at the map and just go around the city and have a really good tour of the city. What it helps you do is you can just map out where the point of interest are located by just looking at how the arrondissements are arranged. Why is this relevant to architecture? This served as my inspiration ever since I started writing applications, not just on Android. If anyone can take the architecture blueprint of an application and be able to debug code, able to review code, or able to write code based on that architecture, that is when the architecture blueprint is really efficient. So that's why I feel like if I'm able to just write softwares following architecture blueprint and make it work and scale effectively, then we have the right architecture in place. So talking about architecture, a little bit about the structure of this talk. So first, I will outline some of the challenges that the developers or the teams at Coursera face, not just on mobile, but other teams as well. And then that will set up the kind of motivation behind the architecture that may serve, may be the right for us. And then we will go on exploring to find the right architecture fit to meet those challenges. Talk about how you can validate the architecture even without writing a single line of code. And then we'll go into a demo and some samples. And then at the end, I'll talk about some of the cons, some of the things to keep in mind, and some key takeaways. So Coursera is an education platform with the vision that anyone, anywhere can transform their lives by accessing the world's best learning experience. And the platform is available through Android app on Google Play and a variety of other platforms like iOS and web. In terms of mobile usage, 24% of learners on Coursera, active learners on Coursera are mobile only. And that number is increasing. Just last year alone, we saw 109% increase in mobile learners. And month over month, Coursera is adding about half a learners on its platform. And most of these learners are coming from countries like India, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, a lot of developing countries. So what are some of the challenges? So most of the high growth countries, learners have really spotty or bad network speeds. Cellular speeds are mostly edge or 2G level. As a company, if being a startup, the company needs to build really fast MVPs. By MVPs, I mean minimum viable product. So the company needs to build faster proof of concepts and discard them or run ahead with them, depending on the results. And the company is at a point where developers or on any platform are spread across multiple teams and are collaborating on a shared code base. So that also comes with a lot of challenges. With a show of hand, who all has ever used MVC in this room? Me too. So most of the applications I start writing, I always start with MVC in the beginning. And then, of course, I run into challenges and I try to figure out how can I architect it better, how can I make it more modular. But a lot of times that comes as an afterthought. I just first start as an MVC. And this is what an MVC architecture looks like. There is a view and a model, and a controller sits between the view and the model. What ends up happening in most cases is view and model are well defined. They have their own set of responsibilities, which they carry out well. And rest everything gets into the controller. which doesn't even belongs to the controller. So that comes with its own set of challenges. So most of us start with MVC. We think whether or not it's right or wrong. Then we think about MVP. So even in my mobile team, in my Android team, we looked at MVP and tried to figure out if this architecture will fit our needs. Then we looked at MVVM and also started figuring out if this architecture will fit our needs. So what were the needs? What helps us to do is to model the problem in terms of the problem space and the constraints. So if we are building a very basic application, mostly on web, using MVC, this is what that model will look like. You can call it a table of responsibilities or an architecture blueprint. But what you have is, in each of the columns, you have the component in your architecture. And in the rows below them, you have the responsibilities of each of these components. But mobile is very different from traditional web or desktop softwares. What's different is, in most Android applications, in all Android applications, the activities, the fragments, or the views, they have definite stages or life cycles, which is very, very closely controlled by the Android platform. Applications can get killed at any time. Services can get stopped at any time and things like that. The device configuration can change at any moment, and your application needs to respond to these changes. So if the screen gets rotated, if the keyboard pops up or down, then the views need to rearrange themselves. If the network connectivity is lost, and things like that. A lot of applications can just get data from an API, or are just local applications which never even interact with the network. But most applications are a combination of getting data from APIs and providing some offline capabilities to the users by just interacting with local storage. In case of gaming applications, this is even more complex, where some data is downloaded from remote servers, and then the user is playing on the device. There are a lot of writes happening. And then at some point, all of this needs to be synchronized. High scores need to be calculated and synced across multiple devices and things like that. And for smartphones to be smartphones, it's natural for applications to take advantage of all of the sensors on the device and do smart things with them, or just let the user aware of their context based on these sensors. So with that, this is what an architecture blueprint or a responsibility table for model view controller on Android platform will look like. So model does a lot of managing data and resolving consistency issues. View, in addition to just rendering the model, also needs to take care of the state of the view. So if the user had a checkbox clicked, you need to save it and restore it back as is if the app goes into the background. And the controller is the interaction layer between the view and the model, and it just ends up handling a lot of things. A lot of times, the controller may need to interact with the system components. It needs to grab the location updates based on the application. It may need to interact with system events, or it may also need to make sure that the view is always showing the right data based on the latest state synced from another app or from the network, and so on and so forth. So in code, the model will look something like this, or even more. The view, most importantly, will have to make sure the view state is saved when the app goes into the background. And the controller will be doing a variety of these things. In my experience, what I have seen is software developers are very smart. They're not constrained by the architecture. They want to write good and modular code. So what ends up happening is anybody who gets a controller like this will start thinking about how can I make this code more modular, so that I can maintain it well, I can manage it well, and things like that. The problem with that is 2 developers on the same team or 2 engineers working on the same open source project may have different ideas on how the code should be organized. And that leads to chaos and consistency. One person leaving or not being active on the project will cause problems with another person who is just onboarding onto the project. So that doesn't really help a lot. In fact, it defeats the purposes and doesn't help teams meet the challenges of the product that they need to meet. Most of the time, developers spend their time on figuring out how to organize their code better. So what the mobile team at Coursera decided to do was not to go around and look for other solutions, but to go back to MVC, try to understand the problem first, and try to figure out how to evolve MVC into a solution that can work well for us. What that led us to do was go back to this table of responsibilities and understand how can we look at this table and understand how to organize it better, and find validation in principles in software design principles like SOLID. So we start from ground up, adhering to these principles, which are time-tested to be functionally scalable, highly testable, and things like that. So the first thing we started looking at is all of these interaction pieces. View needs the data, controller needs to provide the data and handle view events. So maybe interaction does not belong here. It can be moved into a separate component, which can be specialized for just interaction. And it can manage interactions with all external agencies, including model, including system. So this is how the MVC architecture can then be rearranged to factor in the interactor part. The controller no longer directly interacts with system and model. Interactor sits in between. Now, the interactor can be specialized by itself to handle the interaction with system, if more layers need to be inserted in between to make it even more modular. But in general, controller is completely isolated from changes in the model and the system part of the application. So taking it back to the table of responsibilities, it gets rearranged like that, and there is a new column there called the interactor. So next, View should only care about rendering the view model or the view data. And then you can do smart things on Android like data binding, which released just last year from Google. The support library data binding can just take in the view data and just bind it with the view, and you're done. So all of these managing view state and view updates and all of these things can be moved into a specialized component. And what can be done is the controller can manage the view model. The view model just represents all of the data that the view needs to represent. And it will have the data exactly formatted to what the view wants to show. So date formatted in certain ways, text formatted in certain ways, etc. And then the controller can just manage the view model, manage updates to the view model. And view just gets the view model, gets updates from the controller, takes the view model, and renders the view. So bringing the view model in now, we have two additional components, the interactor and the view model. But we are approaching the first solid principle, the single responsibility principle, quite closely. So next, we see that the controller is not doing much of control. So it's mostly handling the presentation logic. So we can just call it the presenter. And next, we can look at all of these parts about managing data. So managing data is something that the entire application needs and needs to share. If each screen of the application or if each view of the application starts managing the data, the benefits of reusability are lost. Common caching, common storage, all of these things become harder to maintain. So most applications, including the application at Coursera, we took all of this data interactions and moved into a different layer in the application and called it data layer. And this component was responsible for getting data from network, taking the data from the database, resolving all of the inconsistencies, and exposing it back to the interactor, not as a layer, but as an object called entity. So this is what that looks like in the architecture. A really great thing with that is if the network exposes the data in one representation and the storage represents the data as another representation, then the interactor cares nothing about that. It just gets a single representation called an entity, and all of the other abstractions is hidden in the data layer. If you want to make more optimizations to your storage for faster serialization and deserialization, want to add things like flat buffers and whatnot, you can do that right in the data layer without having any dependency on the rest of the application. So with that, this is what the updated table of responsibilities will look like. One more thing to notice is there is navigation going on through the presenter. It can happen in the view or the presenter, either, but because the presenter was the controller, it was handling the navigation. On Android, what navigation typically means is that you construct an intent, put in the target. It can be an implicit or an explicit intent. In case of explicit intents, you would put in a target component and you would put a bunch of flags in there, and then you would put a bunch of data in there to render the next view. Data will be typically like some ID or some additional information for the target activity, and you just fire off the intent. Now, if this logic is in every single presenter for every single view, it's spread all over the place, and it's not reusable. If you have to navigate to external apps, then again you have to create those intents over and over again, and that logic is strewn all over the code base. So just to manage all of this better, the navigation functionality itself can be hoisted up a little bit along with the main application, which can just take care of creating all of the intents. And then any part of the app can just ask the specialized component, I want to go and do this next. And that specialized component can take care of it. You can call it a router or a flow controller. That's what we went with at Coursera. And that flow controller basically sits out of the presenter on a higher layer. The nice thing about flow controller is if you want to run A/B tests and things like that, you can go and make the change over there without disturbing the rest of the application. So it makes everything really clean. But there's still one problem with the architecture that we are seeing here, and that's a lot of tight coupling, especially the higher layers depending on the lower layers, and the lower layers needing to call back the higher layers when they have results available for them, represented by these arrows. So if we apply dependency inversion to it, it would look something like this, where all of the higher layers will directly interact with the lower layers, but lower layers will always interact back with the higher layers through asynchronous communication or loose coupling. And there are various ways to achieve that. You can use callbacks. I'm not a big advocate of callbacks at all. What I like really is reactive programming, and this is really, really simple and powerful if you use a library like RxJava. You can use anything you want. RxJava just is very specialized for these sort of interactions. So this is what the architecture will look like. And this is what the final table of responsibilities will look like. You have 5 different components in here, and then you have all of the responsibilities in here. So this architecture is nothing new. Mutual Mobile came up with something called Viper architecture a while ago. In this case, we decided that we need something more than Viper, and that's why we also added view model in there, so that data binding and view representation is extremely easy. And the flow controller is really, really useful. What we do is all of the navigation in the app is actually not based on intents, it's based on URLs. So all of the application components adhere to a URL, and they ask to navigate to the next URL, and the flow controller takes care of mapping a URL to an intent and fires that intent. So it's extremely flexible, and it helped us build deep linking into the app really, really easily. So did we nail it? Did we fix all of the problems? Did we address all of the challenges that we initially came up with? We looked at solid principles as our guideline, and we were able to adhere to single responsibility principle. All of the components are nicely isolated and can be easily segregated using interfaces. Dependency inversion is applied, so there is no tight coupling between higher layers and the lower layers. And one part of the app changing does not affect other parts of the app. The nice thing is that when the UI or the view components are interacting with the data components can be replaced without affecting the view at all. And all the view knows is that it had a subscription that it wanted to grab updates from, or it needed to provide callback on which it needed to get the updates on. So in terms of testing, so testability is also considered one of the key objectives of evolving an architecture to be something that can address the challenges, especially for maintainability. So Vue can be tested using Espresso. Espresso is a great library for UI testing. The presenter can be tested using JUnit. This is just a Java object, no Android interactions at all. Interactor can be, again, tested using Android or JUnit. If there are system level interactions involved, then you would want to use Android test cases. Otherwise, just JUnit will mostly be fine as well. And flow controller, again, can just be tested using JUnit plus mocks, Android involved only if there is any interaction with system components or Android-specific platform components. And so this also adheres to clean architecture. Clean architecture is about architecture in layers, with the UI layer at the very outer, as the very outer layer, and the data layer as the very inner layer. And there is a dependency rule that only goes in one direction, which means that the UI can be dependent on the data layer to grab data, but data layer has no dependency at all on the outermost layers. So if we apply the same layered approach to the architecture that we just looked at, this is what it will look like. There will be a UI layer, which will encapsulate the presenter, the view, the flow controller, and the view model. The data layer will have the interactor and system components if needed, domain layer, sorry. And the data layer will contain the set of entities and your repository layer and data source layer and so on and so forth. So that was all a lot of walkthrough of the architecture. There is code available for a brief walkthrough of how this all works in practice. This is the link to the GitHub repository that has the source code. There are additional, from our learnings in the past year, I've also added all the frameworks that we have used to make this really simple to implement in practice. Dagger is used for dependency injection, which makes it really, really easy to configure everything from data layer all the way up to the UI layer, the presenters, the interactors, and so on and so forth. Managing the context, because there are two types of context in Android, and it can lead to a lot of problems if they are interchanged at all anywhere. And there is heavy use of RxJava in all of the layers. And Retrofit is used for networking, which is a really great library, works out of the box and works great. This is a small demo of the application. It's just one screen application showing a list of courses from Coursera. A disclaimer is the API that is used here may be deprecated at any point in the future, and it is not meant for building clients on top of Coursera. This was a very old API, and I just used it for demo purposes. So in terms of how it translates into code, if you are building a very, very simple application like the one that I just showed you, you would have typically all of these classes. The actual Coursera app does not have all of the application components in one module. The concept is that there is one shell app and all of the rest of the functionalities available as modules. So catalog module is its own module, video module is its own module, and the main app just has few activities. The activity that is the launcher activity is launched, and it directly asks the flow controller to launch the activity. That should be the first activity shown on the screen when the app comes up, based on different states. Is the user logged in? Is the user logged out? Do we want to run an A/B test to show user something else other than the activity that was being shown before? Things like that. And then it just fires a URL. The flow controller takes the URL, translates it into an intent, and fires it. And the activity that's responsible for handling it responds to it. In this particular case, in the example that I have in the code base, all of this has been simplified because I just wanted anybody looking at the code base to focus on the architecture intent rather than how to organize the code base and understand how dependencies work with each other. So the main activity, all it does is when it launches, it asks the flow controller to launch the first activity in the application. And the flow controller creates the intents and starts the activity. The first activity, in case in what I just showed, a catalog activity, and catalog activity creates the presenter. So the activity is dependent on the presenter. And one important thing that it does is, on resume, the activity subscribes to updates from the presenter, and on pause, unsubscribes to those updates. So it avoids all sorts of bugs, which happens when a view is changed while the app is in the background or after the on-pause lifecycle stage. The catalog presenter manages the view model, so it creates the view model, and it does some additional stuff to set up the updates back into the view. And then it creates the interactor as well. So the presenter is dependent on the interactor. As the presenter is created, it loads data that the view needs to render. So it calls into the interactor and listens to updates from the interactor, again, through RxJava. One thing to note here is the observe on part here. For a long time, I saw a lot of code bases using RxJava doing these things where they would make some, they would call into the interactor or the network layer, and they would get back updates on a background thread, and they would put it on a UI thread by using the looper. But RxJava is really powerful in that it provides all of these observe on and subscribe on behaviors where you can set the thread where the subscription needs to happen and where the callback needs to come back. And once the callback comes back, the presenter updates the view model. It can optionally also specify failure handlers where it can update the view model to handle the failures, so show something else like no network image, or it can do something else. And then the catalog and the view model is basically just a bunch of objects that the view needs to render and can easily bind into. And if it is parcelable, it can save its state, like checkbox clicked and whatnot. AutoParcel is a library that is really great, which it is based on auto value, and all you need to do is define all of the things that you want without having to write the creator and write parcel and things like that. And then the interactor basically just calls the data source and asks it to get all the data. Again, based on RxJava, it returns back an observable or a subscription to the upper layers. So, what were some of the challenges and how did we overcome some of these? So some of the main challenge was making sure that the context is always right. The views and the presenters need to deal with the activity context, but the data layer or the network layer needs access to the application context because that has longer lived interactions with the application. Initially, there was a lot of confusion on how we dealt with that, and we a lot of times got it wrong and had to be caught in code reviews and stuff. As we moved to Dagger, Dagger made it really easy for us to configure the presenter and the network layer to have access to the right context, basically. So developers could not make mistake out of like ignorance or just not knowing or just not paying enough attention. There are a lot of classes, and in addition to the classes, there is a lot of tracking related code, like how do you track metrics. So there used to be additional classes for tracking metrics, and then a lot of other things like how do you make sure that all of the classes are doing the right things. So annotation processing is really powerful, and a lot of our code now uses annotation processing for just boilerplate code generation. And Again, onboarding new team members, educating new hires, it was really challenging in the beginning because we were also learning ourselves. But as we nailed down this approach, built multiple views based on this approach, we were able to build a set of tutorials and a set of really good examples that we could share with new hires and get them onboarded really fast. And now the learning curve is really small and new hires learn really fast. One other thing to note is both the iOS and the Android team at Coursera use exactly the same architecture, and most of the approaches are also very similar. So we have a lot of iOS and Android folks crossing teams all the time, and as long as they know the platform, they don't feel out of place at all. They're able to understand what a view does, what a presenter does, what is an interactor, and what not to do in any of these layers. So some of the key takeaways through this entire process was not to wait until the very end and make sure that we have refactored all of the code base and the architecture is ready for production and things like that. The typical release cycles in our company is 2 weeks. So any new idea or any new change to the process was shipped within 2 weeks, and we closely monitored the app to make sure that it's not breaking, it's doing the right things, and also in team retrospectives or just introspection on how this whole process was working, we were actively discussing how to make the next change, how to make things automated, how to make things easier. So it was a continuous process where we were very aware that this is going to take certain amount of time to get grounded, so let's just work on it around that time. In terms of code refactoring, what do we do? The moment we decide on a new architecture, do we just go ahead and refactor the entire code base to the new architecture? Or do we wait till the new architecture has completely evolved, and then we wait for each of the modules to be deprecated, and then write things from ground up? So we did the latter part. What we did was we did not refactor from ground up. We started creating sample modules and made sure that these modules are good, these modules are solid and truly represent the spirit of the architecture. And when it felt like we are getting closer and closer, that's when we decided that, okay, now let's wait till the product tells us that we don't want to show the catalog this way, let's show it that way, and then we will throw the entire code away and write the catalog from scratch. And then whenever we made changes, we made sure that we validated it with the design principles that we started with, which was solid and clean architecture, and made sure that we are not making changes to break consistency with those principles. And then we iterated and iterated and iterated on this. What we also were very aware of was the changes between each iteration were not substantial. We made sure that the changes were getting smaller and smaller. So we felt that we were overall converging on our architecture approach, the way we implemented this architecture in practice, and the way we were seeing benefits out of all of the things that we were doing. So we know that the needs of the product may change again. We know that the app, for all we know, may get split. We know that we may need to build an entire application, which is very different from the one that we have. But we have an approach, and we have approach that we have built that can help us guide through this process of finding the right architecture fit. So I personally know that I'm not going to start with MVC without even validating MVC against my needs. I know that this is how I can go through the process of evolution, and this is how I can figure out what the right architecture fit for my application is going to be. So with all of that, just a hiring plug, Coursera is hiring, and you can contact me through any of these ways to let me know if you're interested.